Who joined?
Paul.
Oh, hey.
Okay. I'll start. Last night, very late, I merged my "Let's get all the spawns working" for compiled code PR. It fixed other bugs also, like lots of them. Hopefully they weren't affecting your branches while you're like, what did I do wrong? As a quick list, let's see if I can pull it up. So to be able to write the tests as integration tests, process info now supports links and trapped exit to like check are we trapping exits or not, and links because I need to count them. We have integration tests for apply to, link, process flag to, spawn one, spawn link one, spawn monitor two, and spawn op, which like does all the other spawns that take just a closure. So not currently testing MFAs, just testing anonymous functions, but not only like actual anonymous functions, not captures, because captures have a aren't lowering right now. I opened an issue about it. To be able to get the errors back for like bad arguments before spawning, Erlang spawn 2 is used instead of Lumen built-in spawn 1, so like there's no built-in in the compiler code anymore. Both the full and minimal, both
No built-in for which?
Like there's that section where like you match for spawn 1. There's no Lumen built-in spawn 1 anymore. Right. You have that like section of like 10 functions where like they're Erlang BIFs, and you were saying, I'll implement them because we couldn't call OTP. I just removed that one. I did the same thing with exit, but to be clear, I didn't get rid of the built-in exit because we need that once we catch the panic. It's just getting rid of the one where like the one, if you explicitly call it in Erlang code, that one that goes through OTP and it does process raise. That probably messes with your stuff. Yes, and I did that because when I called the built-in one directly, it actually would not compile. So that was my workaround, was to use the OTP one there. If there's a different way to do it, I'm fine with that with your changes.
Do you have the compile error for that somewhere?
I would have to go back before mine merged to see it.
Okay.
It was one of those. It was like an LVM
you have a module
level.
I can test with it. I'll figure it out. But
you'd have to go back to you'd have to put the code back in. So
yeah, I know. I still have it because I haven't merged your changes into my branch.
Right. I mean, probably what I would do is just, what is it? I mean, just take one of the spawn link tests and see how it breaks on your branch without my changes.
Sure.
Because like it won't run obviously because spawn link isn't implemented, but you should see the original error I saw with like exit being at the end of stuff, because it meant I couldn't like exit abnormal, or just exit with a reason in the stuff.
I know there was one bug I fixed on my branch related to the throws being terminators. That's probably what you were seeing, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So
I was basically doing something similar to test the exception stuff. So exits and throws and
right. That's what it sounded like. Was like it could not. It seemed like one thing wasn't filled in. I'm like, oh, it's probably that it doesn't know that exit is in Rust it returns exclamation point. Like it doesn't know like this is the end.
Right. It was marked as a terminator, but there isn't a return after it because it was lowered originally as a call. So I wasn't not lowering the return when it's an exception intrinsic. So then it would complain that you can't have a terminator in the middle of a block or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm fine with that one going back to not calling it. The only thing is we go back to built-in. The built-in ones usually don't have the error handling. You're like, well, what does it matter for exit? Because like exit would still be a terminator even if it produced bad arc. Well, that one doesn't. Not exit one, but like
I mean, all the exit stuff lower directly to throwing an exception, which is part of the reason why it's important for those.
Yeah, I'm fine with going back on that one. So now instead of like all those spawn functions that were in core, each runtime has like functions they export. So Lumen underscore RT apply 2 and apply 3 that does the actual work of calling in. That handles doing the bad arity stuff or the other errors, because we need to reproduce the backtrace that makes it look that like bad arity happens in the child process, and it says that it happens in apply 2.
Right.
And so like that does that. And the way I got around with the fact that like, right now, because of trap exceptions and trap exception impulse can only pass one argument, when doing scheduler spawn closure passes just the arguments that would go to apply 2, so like a list of args. And for spawn module function arguments, which was the thing I added to support the spawns for MFAs, even though I haven't tested them yet, they pass a list of args that would go to apply 3. But since it's one argument and apply 3 wants 3 arguments, there are now things in Lumen called apply 2, and apply 3 that apply 3/1 that like actually unpack that list and call apply 3 or apply 2 the correct way, so that we can get away with still only passing the one argument when we spawn a process, because I figured that was easier than having to secure more registers through the assembly code. And it worked with the assembly code you already wrote, and it was only a runtime change. Then if you want to do it differently, I'm fine with that too. But it does work.
Where is that found again?
The
code for that you're talking
about? So in the scheduler, there's the spawn closure, and then there's spawn module function arguments. The implementation for that in both of them end up not directly calling the thing you want to call, because we can only pass in one thing. And so instead, the thing they actually spawn is a new function calling Lumen apply 2/1 or apply 3/1. And then that passes in the one argument of the list of arguments to call. And then that's in OTP, because I made a Lumen module in OTP for other stuff like is big integer and is small integer for writing the integration tests easier, so that I didn't have to remember what size big and small integers were. Or at least I could assert that I didn't mess up the math if we tested on a weird environment. So that the bug fixes we get for that is spawn 1 now triggers bad arity correctly. The native arity, so like closures and native arity and frame with arguments now use the same calling convention as the codegen stuff, so that if the environment is not empty, it passes the closure, so that the code for the closure function can actually extract our environments that way instead of splatting the environment arguments. So that's both native arity is fixed to be +1 or +0 if there's no environment, and so is frame with arguments. So full and minimal use the same calling convention, so that there's not a difference when we finally get to the point of being able to compile WASM code. It won't be a big change. I removed receive peak with type because we don't need it for how we handle timeouts now. I had to increase the process stack from 4 to 8, but it looks on your branch you increased it to 16. And this is mostly that when I had a debug, when like bad arity was tried to be printed, or when you call any formatter code in a newly spawned process, it would blow the stack for some reason. And so I had to keep increasing it.
Yeah, some of the core runtime functions consume a pretty large amount of stack.
Yeah.
I increased on mine to 16 just to leave plenty of space, but it was also necessary to increase it quite a bit for the backtrace stuff.
Yeah, it looks like anything to do with hash map and anything to do with the formatter code uses a lot of stack.
Hash brown on its own uses about 4K bytes.
Yeah, so and it could be that it was formatting something that had a hash map in it, and that's why it went bad. I don't remember why, but yeah, it's unfortunately some of the Rust libraries are a little bit dangerous with stack usage for for our purposes.
Yeah.
Because of the changes, because spawn monitor now works, the demonitor tests are now fixed because they used the seg fault. Some fixes to how timers work with after. The way I had fixed it last time, I was trying to be like, oh, we won't start a timer if we don't need it. But that means that if you had a big mailbox full of a lot of messages and you had to check all of them to see if they didn't match, it'd only start the timer then, which means the timer was wrong. You know, if it was a shorter number of milliseconds, potentially it should really start as soon as you start looking, even if you have to go through your backlog of your mailbox. And now it does that correctly. Because that's how after works. Is that it's described in the docs as not how long it takes to find a match, not how long it takes to get the first message to be checked. And so the way I had written it was it would work the first message to be checked. And also, so that's fixed now. The timers work correctly for after.
Yeah, I think most people probably would expect it to be, you know, the dead time that you spend waiting. So if there's no messages, waiting for like 5 seconds.
Right, but that's not how
versus like if it took 100 milliseconds to do it, you know,
yeah,
you're waiting 4,900 milliseconds instead of 5,000. You know, I don't know that really matters too much.
Other thing, which I talked to you about already, Paul, was that built-in receive done is not called when there's a timeout. So now in the built-in receive wait, if a timeout occurs, I remove I clean up the timer at that point because done doesn't get called the way it's lowered right now. If that changes, then that can change back again.
Yeah, I'll have to check and see if that's an artifact of how I'm lowering it or if that's the control flow graph.
Yeah, but it is protected that it is marked as unreachable. And it still does the match check where like only receive state received should ever occur in done, and so it'll error if we ever change it, and then we can just fix it. You know, it won't silently be fixed and we forget to clean up timers or something weird like that. The reason why I caught that is it did a receive and then it entered another receive and the cursor wasn't reset correctly because of a timeout. So like that's how I knew that was wrong.
Yeah.
Other stuff. Oh, I don't know why when I did the runtime, I thought this originally. It may have been because I did the logging first and then I did the monitor and links. But I was counting expected errors as the SASL expected of like normal or shutdown a shutdown two tuple. And that's not how link works. It has to be normal or it propagates. And so I fixed that now. And we log everything that's not normal. So we'll log shutdowns too. If we want to use the SASL rules later, I'll do it. I do have now a thing where I can turn off log exits so that we don't print the exit messages when we're doing the integration tests, because my integration tests are all output based, like directly what standard out says, just for safety reasons in case the compiler is super broke, instead of like just testing it in the Erlang code itself.
I mean, in general, testing against output is going to be pretty much the best way to go for this suite of tests.
Yeah.
For things that, you know, once we've got a test suite that establishes that a test suite in Erlang is sufficient, you know, then we can, you know, run those tests without necessarily having to.
Yeah, I don't think we should do output testing when we try to actually run the OTP tests. But for like this stuff of us testing us, we need to do it because we won't check it otherwise. There was a bug in propagating exits in minimal runtime. You had the code for checking should you propagate exits only if the process actually ran, and you skipped it if the process was already exiting when you entered, but full was the other way. And the reason for that is that if you have start
check that on my branch.
No, I didn't check on yours yet. If you have the start PID, a parent PID, and a child PID, and
I completely rewrote that.
The parent will propagate, and then the parent would already be marked as I'm exiting, but that parent in minimal would not then propagate to the start PID to say that it was going. So like if you did a monitor on the parent PID, it wouldn't show up in the start PID, and that fixes that. Maybe you change it. I don't think it's one of the conflicts that was marked though, but I could be wrong. There's a couple workarounds. I have a workaround right now for that bit width one. The integration test just try to recompile like 7 times, and it sometimes clears it on Mac. It doesn't clear it as much on Linux though. Not sure what it is still. We still need to fix it. There's a workaround for 546 was when I realized that the format of, if you do exit with a reason, that reason alone is what gets passed along on a monitor call or whatever. If you do bad arity though, the format is bad, like a tuple of bad arity with then another subtuple next to it of the fun and the args, but then that is in an outer tuple of like that whole bad arity tuple and the stack trace.
I know,
and that is
I know
called
what the
exit
problem
reason.
is.
And so right now I have a thing, it's literally called workaround with the issue number to do that, or to get rid of like the fact that exit was propagating too. So like there's workarounds for that. But once those are fixed by your code or whatever, then I can take out the workarounds. There was a bug on the Arch32 encoding that nil uses a header tag, but it's not a header. So for the is header, I now exclude nil in addition to none, because otherwise it wasn't allowing nil, i.e. empty list, to be pushed to the stack on WASM, which was bad. It turned out that the reason why we kept seeing no test to run for WASM pack was they've updated the libraries for WASM bindgen, and they actually changed what in the generated code, the prefix on the function names, on like the export names, changed. And so our WASM pack was looking for the new name, but we were generating the old name, and that's why nothing was running. So I updated all the WASM pack stuff and WASM bindgen, and it fixed that issue.
So hold up, rewind here. The nil thing. Say it again. What was happening?
I couldn't stack push, not the native stack, but the stack that's at the end of the heap that WASM uses right now. I couldn't stack push nil because the check is the term valid, and is the term valid to like push to a stack is it not none and is it not a header? But nil shows up as a header because on the Arch32 encoding, it uses a header tag and not like an immediate to tag like in the actual beam encoding. So I just made it already had a check to be like, if none, like if it has a header tag and it is not none, then go on. And then I added also to exclude that it's not nil. So like it only happens on Arch32, so you probably didn't see it if you weren't doing WASM stuff.
Oh, I see.
And the only reason we saw it now is because some of the tests end up spawning a process with no arguments for the way I rewrote the tests. There was also a bug in when I did the thing where like instead of doing alloc and going to the GC, where I just like make a heap fragment now when it doesn't fit, the way I calculated the size for new tuple from slice didn't remember that the elements clone recursively, and so it was only including the space for the tuple. And so that's fixed now, and now everything uses new and does that. I did open a bug that like
Hold up. Wait. Well, as long as the clone to process check everywhere checks that it exists on the heap first, that's fine. But that's going to be.
I'm saying tuple. In term alloc, it calls tuple from slice. Tuple from slice, defers to the struct tuple : from slice, and that one internally does for each element. It does clone to heap, and clone to heap checks: are you all around the heap? If you're not, okay, I'm going to clone you in. And so that's what I meant by recursive. The other one, like cons and map, don't do that, and they probably need to be fixed, because then if we ever have a very complex message in a timer, we're not actually copying like the entire list and everything it points to, or a map and everything it points to onto the heap. And so if the process goes away, the timer could end up pointing to memory that got garbage collected. So I have a separate issue open to fix that. I didn't fix that in my stuff, but it's a gotcha that we probably have a memory problem.
I mean, cons should be cloning its cells.
No, it just does tail into and head into. So it converts the type term back into a term. That's all it does.
That's fucking broke then.
Yeah, sure. And so is the map one. So
I mean, maps are fucking totally broken right now, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, that's another thing is
work,
we won't be able to use gen server until the map put impl thing is fixed. I think you said that was an EIR thing, right?
There's still some discussion happening there, but I have a workaround in place for it. I just won't be able to test it just yet, but
okay,
sometime in the next day or two.
So like right now, I'm not going to say that we can run actual genserver.url on the compiler by the conference, but we have spawn, so we can like do the equivalent with spawns directly if all else fails. And then, yeah, that covers everything from that PR that was merged last night. It does, of course, as we expected, have some conflicts with your branch, but actually not that many. Mostly we have to figure out, do you want to do it? Do I want to do it? Do we want to pair together after this to fix the conflicts to get in the better back traces?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that I would want to make sure that we are on the same page with is the exception changes.
I mean, we have like 150 integration tests. Like if they work, good enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing is just making sure that it doesn't break a whole shitload of stuff. I'm less concerned about the Rust test than I am about the Erlang tests, since in general we're going to be rewriting all of the Erlang tests anyways. Right, but I don't anticipate that the thing that would break the current Rust test would be assertions against like behavior specific to using arc error versus some other mechanism for propagating traces. So that's where that falls apart. One of the things you can do now, though, is construct a trace and assert against the Erlang term format of that stack trace. Of course, that's a little bit unreliable because obviously the trace is dependent on the real stack. But
yeah, I mean, mostly it was asserting against the arc error because I wanted to make sure that the good error messages were catching and like helpful to the user.
The one thing that we can do to enhance the trace object I created is to allow providing extra context with the trace that we would not display by default, but that we could display if we so chose.
Yeah, I think
likewise, one of the other things that I was going to add to that is the ability to say, I want to include Rust frames with this as well, instead of just Erlang frames.
So I saw on your PR that you update EIR, but I know Hans had also just an update EIR.
It's not the latest.
Okay, but on his one PR that updated EIR, it actually broke one of the integration tests.
So an update on that. I tried it again before your merge, and now there are still failures, but there's only 4 of them, which is the monitor with monitor tests.
Demonitor is broke because spawn links not implemented. Ignore those failures.
Okay, yeah, then everything seems to pass, which is a bit strange because I'm not really like.
Well, there's way more tests. Remember, after my merge. So,
oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's true.
If it's not literally the same tests, like if not the pre-existing ones, so like you can look at the PR and I list the new integration tests. It's like, I mean, I said them, but it's obviously easier to read it, and you can look there to be sure.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's a good point. I should look at that, but and also there is the. Oh, it just dropped out of my mind. Never mind.
But yeah, the spawn monitor and the spawn link is the most complex integration test we have because like some of them are like, I know both the child and parent will die, so like I am spawn monitoring the parent process so that the start PID survives, and so like it is the most complex with multiple receives and stuff like that in the same process. So it's the most complex code. So it's most likely to show an EIR or compiler bug compared to the other stuff, which was much more simple sequential code.
Yeah. I mean, what's kind of surprising to me though is that like the update EIR PR, it doesn't really change a whole lot. It's just like some constructs in the IR look a bit different, which seem to like cause major problems in some areas.
Well, remember, we can always rewrite the test to potentially do a workaround. Like there are things I did in the test, which is not how I would have written the test just to get the workaround. I'm fine with that. It's just I don't want to check in with the broken test.
I mean, at this point, I think it's important to check that stuff in because without the test failures, there's no feedback loop for fixing those things. So, I mean, there's a lot of churn happening right now because we have changes happening on 3 fronts. And we don't want to let that spiral out of control either, but at the same time, having the test failures is useful to fix those tests.
It's safe on the integration test. It's not. It's an annoying thing with Rust that like it's not safe for unit tests because if the unit tests fail, it doesn't even run the integration tests. Just to be clear, so it's fine at integration tests because it'll run all of them.
So just to bounce this off you, Paul, when I like one of the changes I made was that I made the like one of the paths in one of the AR passes a bit more aggressive, which ended up in some cases duplicating the receive weight intrinsic in the receive constructs, which seemed to like work mostly, but it failed on like a EIR branch where it complained about it not being IE1 and being IE8 instead. So like I don't know, I changed like the latest change.
That's probably just a bug in the lowering for checking. It probably was supposed to be a conditional branch, or the lowering code thought it was going to be a conditional branch and it wasn't. But I'm not exactly sure where that would have happened, but as always, a snippet of Erlang code that reproduces it.
Yeah, I mean the awkward thing here is that was also a bug in the EIR pass, which like it saw an opportunity where to optimize and to like specialize that instruction that was totally useless. So it just duplicated it without any actual advantages. So I fixed that, and now that seems to work again, which is this latest one. So I mean, I did. Yeah, I mean, it's not important then, but it just would be.
I should be able to figure out where that happened, anyways, because the situations in which that particular error could be raised are limited. Like, there's only a couple places where that could happen, especially in the receive code. So,
yeah,
I can look at that and probably figure out where that went south. But
I mean,
if not, then whatever. Doesn't
it's
matter.
Not really important because we don't really hit that case. We shouldn't hit that case normally, regardless. It was just something. Yeah.
I mean, we can wait for it to surface again. If for whatever reason I can't reproduce it, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Let's not spend much time on that then.
I am, yesterday I wrote the pass that reschedules operations that have invalid dominance. So that part I still need to test against some IR that produces that error, and I think there's some in like one of the issues.
Yeah, so, I posted an issue which has a pretty minimal case for that.
Yeah, that would be helpful, but that should at least work around that problem. Longer term, having APIs in EIR that allow me to, at least get some scheduling. It doesn't have to be the only one, but some use stuff like API would be helpful.
Yeah, so like to be clear, I don't think I communicated very well in that PR in that issue I made on the EIR repo. I didn't really mean it as like a lower level IR. I meant it more like what we're currently doing with the lower utils and just sort of providing a sort of additional info. I sort of meant like just take that and just make a bit of a more like in-depth sort of like view on top of the EIR there already that provides additional info to any front ends that would want it, but can also just like be ignored if you don't want to deal with it. So like just like explicitly doing control flow as control flow and splitting up the functions, just like a simple representation where it just like references the original EIR with some additional metadata on top of it that you could just like iterate through and lower to whatever backend. But yeah, that's
I mean, like what I was saying in that issue, you know, it's fixing up some of those things and making some of the constructs more explicit, I think is an improvement overall, because those things are already more or less obvious or can be derived. But if you don't have to bother doing it because it's already there, you know, and it's a universal thing, basically everybody's going to do with that IR. So there's no reason not to do it as part of the library.
Yeah, that was my operation. That just like intermingling that with the lowering code just makes it more complex and error prone when it can be quite easily just separated out and do a separate pass sort of, and then also other backends could easily take advantage of that as well because they need it too. But I mean. Just generally, I think it would be nice to do to maybe have less of these like annoying issues in the future, where just like maintaining that as a part of EIR would be a big plus, because it is taking advantage of a lot of implementation details in EIR, so to speak.
Yeah, right now the way the lowering code works is pretty tightly coupled to the representation that sort of should be kind of internal, and ultimately it'd be better to have a more stable consumption target for a compiler like Lumen. You know, that way you can freely make changes without it necessarily impacting how a particular compiler has to lower that code. Obviously, there's limits to it. It's an IR, right? But in our case, like one of the problems there is that I would basically had to infer what the dominance information I could from the information that was available, and it wasn't what it looked like. So that's where that bug came from, I think.
Yeah.
And in general, I think it's probably a lucky coincidence, I guess, that iterating the scope must do it in some sort of predecessor first order, but because otherwise this would surface much earlier, I suspect.
I mean, it does do that, but I sort of view that as an implementation detail of the lower utils, which I mean, sure, I can document that explicitly and make it explicit, but I just like I just didn't think of that as part of the interface.
Yeah, I mean, it was an implementation detail that I more or less was relying on because I inferred it just from the way the IR worked. But that's not to say that it needs to work that way or that, you know, it's a problem with the IR. It's just that as things were being built out, you know, there's too much in flux. So I just had to build on what was available. Yeah. So in that case,
makes
like,
sense.
It worked well enough to get us to this point. But yeah, I would say at least exposing a concrete API that does that sort of traversal and then also commits to some sort of dominance tree for operations would probably be the best way to solidify the IR as something that can be, you know, easily used as the front end for a compiler. Because without that, I mean, the scheduling part, it's nice for me to be able to make those decisions in MLIR instead, because it opens up potential for optimization opportunities. But the problem is without any sort of initial scheduling of operations, it's sort of just a fucking free for all. I have to do what I'm doing now, which is essentially work around the fact that the way things get lowered is arbitrary. And I would rather have something that's correct, but maybe not optimal, and then handle that optimization as part of the backend.
So
versus having it be, something fixed and highly optimized, but leave me with little opportunity to move things around based on how things get lowered. So
you might. I just want to hear what you think about this, because I think the scheduling of the premob should be done in EIR, because there are cases where right, what you're doing right now is you're just scheduling them on the first time you see the value, and that does work. But there are cases in the IR where if there's like the define for the like all the values used in the premob are defined earlier, and then it forks, execution forks, and then you schedule it on the first place where it hits, and that's why it's failing now, because there are two different paths. And then what I think we should do in these cases is that we should then duplicate this premob and schedule it in two places instead of scheduling it strictly at the fork. In some cases where there are other execution paths where we don't need that value. And I think there might be more information to do that properly in EIR than when you lower it to the EIR dialect, because aren't you sort of getting rid of some of the information there as to what is premops and what is not? Or did I misunderstand that?
I think it's more that the way those sort of higher level operations get lowered is the optimizations around where the placement of those things happen is really going to be based on what that code gets generated as, like what sort of low level things are happening to implement those operations. For example, allocations, like I'm going to move those around based on the optimizations performed at the cogem level. And I mean, having that initial scheduling be placed in a way that leaves more optimizations on the table, I think is good, because that just leads to more flexible IR. In the case of, like, your suggestion is fine. I don't see any issue with that. My workaround right now, though, is to calculate the dominance tree for that function and then move those operations and any dependents up to the most common ancestor.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. That should work in every case too.
But then later on, I might have optimizations that then move that down again based on how things actually get moved around during later passes. So if it turns out that I'm just doing duplicate work, there's no reason for me to be doing it at all, right? Like EIR can handle that, and I just work with what I'm given. I don't see any reason that it can't be EIR's responsibility. And so, I mean, I'm cool with that. The thing that I want to make sure that we don't do is commit too strongly to any specific expectation of how the code gets lowered. You know what I mean? Like I think EIR can take optimization as far as it wants, but to a certain degree, I'm not necessarily going to want to do all of those in EIR versus MLIR LLVM.
Yeah.
Because as the representation changes and based on how, like, target specific information, things like that, the path I take for optimizations might be wildly different. Like, especially when choosing to optimize for size or speed, where you place those premobs will heavily influence that. If you duplicate operations, now you're generating a bunch more IR than you would be otherwise.
Yeah.
And some of that can be controlled via flags to EIR's front end. But
do you think the optimization where the operations consisting of a premob in EIR are scheduled at like just like the dominator of all uses? Do you think there are passes where that gonna get split up and moved down to the uses in each path? Are there passes that can handle that kind of optimization?
Yeah, I suspect that that could happen, and is probably likely to happen depending on the code in question. But
yeah, okay. If there are passes that does that, then it's probably not as important that we do this in EIR.
I definitely think that dominant is that the dominant block is better because then we'll be size optimized by default, which will help the most for the WASM target, even with no optimization flags turned on.
Yeah, and that's going to leave more like room to do those kinds of things in LVM or MLIR. Yeah, that's a good point.
But and then there's no reason why you couldn't add a pass in EIR that's optional that then does optimal scheduling for those things for front or compiler backends that don't want to deal with that themselves.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Paul, going back to the backtrace stuff, your one backtrace branch does not affect the problem with try and catch not working in the actual code. It's 534 branch has 0 operands for successor, but target block has 1, right? It's just making the backtraces better. It
does fix it, I believe.
Okay. I will.
Like all the exception stuff works pretty much flawlessly on my branch right now.
Okay, so like Erlang code with a catch works?
Yeah.
Not that it prints. Okay, so we will, once we merge it, we'll try that. And if that's the case, that's like my big thing for blocking like code demos is that we have exceptions where we can't try catch them. We can only like monitor them right now, which is slightly annoying.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a more robust example you want me to test today while I'm doing the merge, then I'll give it a go.
Just is it the last one? Yeah, so the last two on 534, the last one is try catch, and the one before that is just catch, where where it does both. Those two ones, if they work for you, then we're golden. Those are the ones that I think would stop us from being able to do catch and try catch that Gen server does.
Say the last two. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So on issue 534.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one is try catch and the one above is catch. And if those two work, then that fixes why that is considered a blocker for me. The original issue with, I forget what it was. It was something with like binary pattern matching. We'll keep it open for that reason. But it's less important because I can rewrite that as a case. I can't rewrite the catch or the try catch any different way. And so there was no workaround for those two examples of it.
Yeah, I mean, I basically have code just like that. I'll have to test with the calling of spawn specifically, but otherwise, all the exception stuff works.
Okay.
I need to push a new release of LVM as well as, I guess EIR changes I pushed, but we'll need to merge those because my branch won't build without at least the diagnostics changes that I added.
So with that, do you remember you have push ability on the Docker hub for it, or I can do it once you say it's released, and I'll do the Docker image build.
Yeah, now that I know that I can push that, I will. I will do that. If I run into a problem,
You need to do the Docker push, and then you update the GitHub workflow files because we use the SHA-256 so the build is reproducible.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want, and you're going to handle the merge, or do you want to pair on that after this so that we can work out the six conflicts there are? If now's not good for you, later works too for me. But
we can just talk through the merge conflicts are not particularly onerous. I just need to double check and make sure that nothing changed that breaks something that I was assuming, and I don't think that's the case based on the changes that you said you were making. I think probably we're not overlapping in any way that is going to be a problem. The places that I did make changes looks like apply to and apply through both touch, but I was just touching the exception.
Right. So I think it just has to be rewritten to go in the right spot in the code, even though it thinks it's a conflict. So I don't think that's a huge issue. The big one, of course, would be is if you still have you have Erlang exit 1 calling the built-in still, and I did that off because of the other bugs. So like if you
Right. Yeah.
Put it back. I think it'll be fine. I mean, if the integration tests pass with it now and they compile,
yeah,
then it's passing.
I'll fix the bug with that you. In fact, I think I did fix it on my branch, but I'll need to confirm. Actually, did you send me the issue number or the Erlang file that was producing the problem for that, so I can try and repro the specific issue you had?
I don't know if I opened it for that one. I'll have to, let me see if I mentioned exit in here for a different thing.
I mean, presumably it was just some code that called exit. But yeah, there was a bug with all of those. All the throw built-ins had the same problem, that they had an extra return instruction after them when they should not.
Yeah. So like that one shows up as a conflict as I delete it, so you can just undelete it and it'll be fine.
Probably what I'll do is merge it with the removal and then revert that part of your change set. Do you have that as a specific commit, or is it part of a bunch of other changes? Because
I think it's
the way the merges work, like it's going to remove like part of it, probably not all of it.
I want to say that's a specific one. Let's see.
If you just remove that C++ function, then that's easy. I'll fix it as part of my merge. But if there was other changes you made as part of removing that, I don't know what that would have been. But just looking at this, I think, yeah, it looks like you probably just removed that intrinsic. So it's probably not an issue.
Do you think you'll get the merge done today?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, then I'll just wait with this until tomorrow when I can actually look at it with the merge.
Yeah, and once that's in, let me know, and I will. Like, there is, like, it is kind of awesome that like the one unit test for a lot of this stuff is if we throw a bunch of shitty arguments at it, it says bad arg, and like if try catch works, I can convert those all over, and a bunch of them become integration test only functions. That'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be nice to basically be able to move a lot of this into actual Erlang code instead of Rust code, especially because eventually that'll allow us to hopefully strip out all those sort of legacy pieces in the runtime.
Well, we need to keep frame for WASM until we have a solution for the WASM compile, but otherwise, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's the only thing that's really ugly right now is maintaining both of those systems at the same time, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't think we probably need to pair up Luke, but I would just confirm, like, you look through the changes I made for the actual commits, right? Not just the conflicts. Did you get a sense of what I made
review
for
that
those?
way. I checked the conflicts quickly and they didn't seem. I'll do the review also of the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there should be mostly standalone. The thing to note is that the conflicts around exceptions were, mainly in those helper functions and the couple like apply places that I fixed, but I did not make an attempt to like run the integration test suite, or not the integration, but the test suite, and be like, oh, a bunch of these tests are broken because these errors are being asserted against.
So I will say, if you get to the point where that's a problem, just call me in, because like I'm getting really good at using Combi to fix those sort of those things where we have to mass replace. So like I can do those. I just need to know. I don't want it to happen like the other time when I merged your branch early and then it like fucked you over.
Yeah.
So like I want to be very clear that you're handing over the branch to me if you are.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the main problem was I had in progress changes on my local branch, and then when that diverged, it was just a mess. So as long as like, yeah, I am saying like all my stuff is committed, the branch is fine, like then it's never an issue. It's only a problem if like, yeah, like those commits get basically dropped because they no longer exist or something. So in this case, yeah, I think I can get this probably merged in the next hour. I don't think there's really too much in here. I moved some code around. So the one conflict in the built-ins is that you removed one built-in and I moved one out of that file. And I haven't looked at the scheduler conflict yet, but I don't know how much there was in there that there's just one line that conflicts, but I don't know what all the changes were that happened upstream and the minimal scheduler since then. I just need to review those, but probably not.
Well, I mean, if you lose my fix for the propagate and exit, one of the integration tests will fail. Like one of the spawn op ones does. So like it'll be.
I don't think it would have. I don't think we'd lose any of your changes because I didn't make really any changes to that file. I think the changes I was talking about to the scheduler must have happened, already been pushed to develop.
Oh, okay.
I'll double check that to make sure, because some of that was related to exception stuff, but I think I pushed that before I worked on the backtrace part of the exceptions. So, there's like a first initial feature set of the exception handling stuff that was pushed to develop, and then a bunch of changes that I just pushed as part of this branch that are specifically supporting backtraces. So that's where some of those changes
I mean,
GitHub's
resolve conflict on Sketcher says the only difference is you change
one line,
yeah, and that's because of the workaround for 546 with the like extra exit in the reason number, in the reason tuple. So like I just called it exit reason instead of reason, and then you call it exit with source. So that one makes sense. Like you just have to call exit with source with exit reason.
Those calls to exit or error or whatever, wherever they exist, they either need to be updated to use trace instead of source or be renamed to whatever with source. So if you want to continue passing that. For now, that system lets you use either or. The thing that probably is broken, I haven't actually verified this, but I'm quite certain it's probably the case, is if you like process raise a runtime exception without a trace, it probably is broken.
So the way all the BIFs work is they still return result, which will probably have an anyhow source in them. And if it's a runtime exception, that runtime exception is passed to process raise automatically. So like, you write result, but then the native code gets built around that automatically for the macro. And so
the main difference I made, I think, in the one necessary place to make it so that it uses trace, like most times, I did make that change. So
you made to the macro actually, okay.
Right, or I'd have to double check exactly what I'm thinking of.
I'll look through the whole code.
But basically, there were a few places I changed to actually capture a trace and pass that to exit or error or throw. And so I think at least for the general case, it should be working normally. The thing that I haven't tested is like all the BIFs and things like that. So that's where if there's bugs or things missing or broken, that's where they're going to be.
Well, remember, if we want to keep the develop clean, there's always, you can say yours is done, and I can do a PR off for your branch to like everything that like cares about the output error message. We can convert to an integration test on that other one, merge it into your branch, and then merge yours to develop, so that develop stays buildable the whole time.
I know that
because I did that. Like the reason why my PR has like apply to and everything else is an integration test. Because otherwise, I would have had to update the Rust version of the test. And I'm like, if I have to update the test anyway, I might as well just write the integration test and hope the integration test works.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I don't have the bandwidth to make sure that all of those legacy tests pass with some of these things that are dependent on basically rewriting them from scratch.
No, that's fine. So. It's mostly just don't, like, I appreciate that you did a PR this time, and like if the tests are broken and you want to hand it off, that's fine. Just like don't break develop if you can help it.
Yes. I am making sure that I can at least run the compiler and compile programs and have those programs do what they're supposed to do before I push anything to develop. So that at least is the minimum I'm doing. But as far as fixing tests that are not even testing the generated code that I'm changing, then I'm not concerned with those because it's gonna have to be rewritten. And those are things that, yeah, I mean, are going to break the build on develop. And so I try and avoid doing that if I can, but to be perfectly clear, there's like something like what, 1,000 tests that
no,
and like
it's down to 2,057 because I
so
ported, you know,
2,057 tests, and how many of those at this point are testing what is actually going to be called by the generated code? Some of that is, I mean, a large part of it is, but anything to do with exceptions is not. Anything to do with scheduling really isn't.
Most of the scheduling stuff should be gone because I did all the spawns. Well, not the MFA spawns, but
yeah, I mean that I guess may be changing now a little bit. But as we transition to the integration test ended up being significantly more valuable because that's where we're catching a lot of the bugs that are actually being introduced.
Yes.
And it's in an awkward place where we just had a whole bunch of legacy code that we had to have in place for the interpreter and for, you know, experimenting with the runtime and WebAssembly that has got to be rewritten to use the actual compiler backend at some point, but we're having to do that piecemeal. It's onerous. So I
just don't want to lose the frames because I feel like Brian and Docker in general might be mad if we break WASM support for a month or two. And so like I just want to sit there.
Oh, I told Brian already that we're gonna have to break WebAssembly before we can fix WebAssembly because there's no way for us to maintain support for both at the same time in any sort of reasonable time frame. The thing you have to keep in mind is like we have very limited time between the three of us, and if the goal is to get this thing done sooner rather than later, the more time we spend trying to maintain the old stuff that we know we're going to have to get rid of anyways, it just slows us down. But there are caveats to that, namely that the more support we have in making changes and, you know, knowing that things continue to work the way that they are written has value. So I'm not saying that there's not some value in maintaining that stuff, just that we have to sort of optimize for actually getting some of this stuff done in a reasonable time frame. And I'm concerned that the runtime has grown to a point where it becomes increasingly difficult to do that. Like maintain both the generated code working with the build and the existing like interpreter WASM stuff code working. You know what I mean? Like you can pick one or the other to focus on, but maintaining them both as a steady stream of changes is an enormous effort. So I prefer to just be like, yeah, we're going to break WASM temporarily and focus on getting that accelerated than to spend the next 6 months trying to carry both of them forward.
So the WASM tests now use, I don't think I mentioned this with the update, but they like use the Rust async functionality, which is kind of neat.
Oh, nice.
Do you understand how Rust generates the like hidden struct for async? Like because we know Rust can do async functions in WASM, if like we can't figure out any other way to get it to work where like we can pause a function and come back, is there any way that you understand how Rust does like generators or async that we would be able to do the same thing? Because otherwise, like our only option is to do the frame system, which is actually really slow because we have to like, you know, queue up frames, then be like, I'm gonna run these frames, now run the frame, and like it's a much higher overhead process because you never really go deep into the native WASM stack this way.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways you can approach that stuff, and I mean the way that Rust is doing it is not particularly difficult or controversial, but you got to keep in mind that the way Rust is suspending those computations is basically function local. And each one is its own little state machine, an associated state.
Mm-hmm.
And the way our code works is not going to play well with that sort of structure. Like you can write individual functions to operate that way, but as far as having all of our code basically generate async functions like that, I don't think that's probably going to end up working out in practice.
Okay.
It would require significant refactoring of like the entire runtime to support that, I think.
So
it probably makes more sense for us to, push to get the things we need in WebAssembly that they're already exploring, either effects or, some sort of suspendable computation, and then build our processes around those.
Right. I'm just saying that, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking how long GC takes, and like, I don't know. I'm still questioning the usefulness of GC when like Thomas Lively is like, LLVM won't support it. I'm like, who is this for? Like, who?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't necessarily see, I guess there's value in being able to allocate things on the JavaScript heap, but I mean, that's not a priority for us, a thing that we would necessarily care about. No, any sort of interop we do or is going to be with objects that are already on the JavaScript heap.
Yeah, I said as much that it's mostly GC or interface types. We want to get rid of the JavaScript shim, and like which of the proposals does that, we don't care. It's just we want less. We want like one WASM file and it just works.
Yeah, there seems to be more effort around that for some reason than some of the other proposals. I'm not 100% sure why that's the case, but
I'm just like questioning like the Ross Tater, Andreas Rosberg, like one of them mentioned Swift, and I'm like, I know Swift uses LLVM, and if Thomas says LLVM's not going to do it, why are they saying about Swift? Swift's not going to target WASM that way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, at least the GC stuff that I'm building out is I have something that I can map stack maps to, some kind of like address or handle or whatever, that lets me identify where in a function I am. Then I have everything I need at least to generate code that passes in roots to the garbage collector and
no, this is for the GC stuff that's not the memory GC.
I know. What I'm saying is that the GC that LLVM already supports is what we're building on and all that we really care about. And so there's nothing novel about the GC that they're adding to WASM itself. The difference is then if we don't have the tools we need to even generate code that does our own GC, that's a problem. And that's what I wish they would spend more time on, because there are things missing currently that make it extremely difficult to do that. I mean, it's the same reason why doing our own stacks and things like that is a problem in WebAssembly, because they just don't export enough low-level APIs for that. And it's not like it's particularly weird or unusual requirement. Like, this is exceedingly common stuff in all sorts of languages, including C++ and C and all that. So I really wish that they would, throw a little bit more effort behind that, but I guess it's not super important to them, especially these days, because it's just getting more and more common to do lots of little computations, suspendable computations, and pass them around and serialize them and deserialize them. And I just don't understand why that's not a language feature that they're interested in supporting. I mean, there's interest, don't get me wrong. It's just that there doesn't seem to be any like active momentum towards getting something implemented in the browsers right now. There's just a lot of sort of pie in the sky proposals from people that I'm not even sure are working on production languages for the web. They're just either academics or working on like WebAssembly itself, which is not particularly helpful if they're working in a silo, you know what I mean? So I'm basically, as soon as we wrap up some of these last things for x86, and then pretty much the remainder of the work is getting the runtime fleshed out. Like, I'm gonna let you kind of take that while I focus on just getting things done in WebAssembly, because I don't even want to like start trying to build things out for WebAssembly until we have a path forward on some of those items.
Yeah, once try-catch is in, all the integration tests should be convertible. Now, mind you, some of them being prop tests is still super useful, so I might leave them alone. But otherwise, yeah, it'll take a while to convert all like 170 BIFs to integration tests. But hopefully they'll reveal more bugs, and hopefully we'll get good enough that after all those are done, we'll have knocked out every bug, and like Gen server and RAND will completely compile, and we'll be able to start to move on to OTP.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope here. I think actually, by the way, there's a few BIFs that we probably can change, like git stack trace, for example. I did update that already. Okay, cool. So that works with the trace stuff now. Yeah, there's a few of the other, like the BIFs that are throw BIFs, like error 1, error 2, exit 1, throw 1, all that jazz. Like the generated code will never call those. I guess we'll probably need to keep them for the stuff that is not generated code, but at some point we can probably remove those and their associated like unit tests.
That's fine. Oh, we talked about this. What about moving the stuff that you do built-ins for like the math, where I couldn't, like the built-ins for math don't do error handling, and you said we could move those to use the OTP ones. Which way do you want to go on that? Do you want the built-ins to do the error handling, or do you want them to get removed and use the OTP way? Because the built-ins right now aren't aware of the type. They're still passing terms, so they have the same type signature as the OTP ones right now. They're not optimized based on the
right.
compiler known type.
Basically, they exist for that purpose. As soon as we get the opportunity to sit down and do some write some optimizations, the point is for those built-ins to basically be responsible for that. In the near term, could probably disable those built-ins, or I'll call them intrinsics because they're generated code. They're not part of the runtime.
I'm calling it built-in because the name is built-in in them for the function right now. But
that's just the convention I use.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, because normally they're called compiler built-ins, but it's confusing with Erlang because there's built-in functions which are different. They're not compiler built-ins, they're runtime built-in functions. Anyways, it's neither here nor there. I can go in and just disable those.
Oh, you don't have to do them on your branch. I know how to disable them. It's fine. I'll do them.
Just comment out the code that does the string switching. Leave the BIFs in place and all the code for them. Just comment out the code that calls them intrinsics.
Okay.
There's no sense in removing when I'm going to re-add them later.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all I really have for the moment.
Yep.
I'll let you know when I get that merge done. I would take a look at the change set just to make sure that, any of the exception stuff that, you catch anything there that surprises you or is off. But
yeah, I'll do a full code review, not just a conflict review once we get off the call.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. When's the conference again?
It is next week on Thursday and Friday, and I don't know the time. It's the weirdest thing. They have not published the schedule yet. No.
For real?
Like last night, Jim sent out a thing asking everyone what's their time zone to try to figure out when to schedule people.
Holy shit.
And so like right now, and he said that it would be adjusted for like international people. So like, I don't even know like what chunk of time during the day the conference is right now.
That's nuts. How is anybody planning for this?
I don't know. I guess maybe just the whole switch to remote. He has less of a
got away from him or something.
How to do this or something. I don't know.
Oh, that's
I wonder if it's
unfortunate.
going to end up with a whole bunch of people who can't actually present at the time zone, at the time slot
God,
that he
I
chooses.
hope not. I mean, I guess the plus side is that all those people know what day at least. You know, I guess if they don't know what time,
time zone, it's potentially a different day for them.
True. I guess if they're presenting from overseas.
Yeah, the Pelame guys are talking. So they're
interesting.
talking, UTC -10.
Oof, man. That's brutal.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess let me know when you find out. Did you hear anything about like a Q&A or anything like that?
No conversation after with Estelle asking if we wanted to do it. So nothing back from Backyard Marketing or and nothing back from Jim saying yes, it's a thing. I mean, the website says there's already a plan for a hallway track, but obviously without the schedule, and because the Zooms have to stay private, how exactly it works is unknown.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's probably going to be the way that ElixirConf virtual happened, but remember, we just hopped on a call. Hans, did you actually attend, or did you just do your talk?
I attended, yeah. I watched some talks at least. I didn't watch them all, but...
So how did, disclosure of how to get to a talk work? Was it, you just, could go to a private site, or, it was in Whova and you got a link and you had to open it or something?
Yeah, no, Whova has integration for the stream, so you just, click on the thing on the schedule, and it opens, a window with a stream and, a question thing on the side and stuff.
Yeah, I haven't been emailed a thing. Actually, Jim said we were going to get a thing for an invite, and I don't remember getting one. So right now, maybe that's why I don't have a ticket, and that's why I can't see shit.
If you still have the app on your phone and you open it up, I think it automatically adds you to any conferences you purchase tickets to. If I remember
that's true.
correctly.
Yeah.
So it might have some information in there, but.
Yeah, I think RustConf went with just make the streams open. And I don't know what.
Jim's not going to do that. He's way more of a business person about it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, when everything's virtual like this, I'm just sort of wondering what's even the point of having it be a paid conference? Is there any advantage to it? I mean, you have to have the organizers, obviously, but it's not
For Jim, I'm sure it's about recovering some of that lost investment, because he spent a bunch of money 2 years ago now on reserving the conference facility for multiple years. Yeah. And then this year just got hosed. So I'm not even sure what happened with that, but I'm sure he lost a grip of cash off of that. So he's hoping to get what he can.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Yeah, I can see that.
Hopefully he didn't lose too much, but
yeah, I'm hoping the hotel cut him a deal finally, and that's why it was okay with being virtual. But
yeah, it sucks for everybody for sure. I definitely am missing not having a conference to go to this year, but it is what it is. At least one of us will be talking there.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll ping you in a little bit here. Let you know when that merge is done. I have something I have to do for about an hour here, and then should be able to get to it. So
that's fine, Paul. You have a different job than me and Hans. It's okay.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. I basically dedicate, some portion of my day to this stuff. So I treat it like a job as much as I can. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.